can hear it. Great, fantastic. All right, so let's get started. And basically, we're going to chat about a couple of things. As you can see the title, I'm going to, let me see here. Okay, let me reshare that screen for you, because in case that is not working. Okay, so let me try this again. All right, great. So are you able to see the next slide now?
Yes.
The slide title, Conversation. Are you guys able to see that?
Yes, we can. We can see the slide.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So, okay, so conversation, that's our first slide there. So writing is a form of social interaction. I don't know if you've heard that before, but that's something very common in any type of writing. And, you know, part of this comes from Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian, theorist of writing. He talks about dialogism and, the fact that, that writing is a dialogue, right? The reason I want to mention that first is that we're often in conversation with writing. What do you understand by it is my question to you. And when I'm putting this question to you, something for you to kind of keep in your mind is that whatever it is that you're doing in the type of writing that you're doing, you are talking, okay? And this is also a good theme for us because it's a conversation that we're going to have about, all these various ways in which to make your writing more accessible, coherent, and persuasive, right? During the course of this, so I'm going to elicit conversation from you as well, something to keep in mind, and do not feel as though you have to get the responses right or anything like that. No, that does not matter. The actual, rightness or wrongness, if you will, is completely beside the point, because it's still a conversation. Any kind of response that you can think of, right? Those responses could be in the form of guesses. Guesses are good. Guesses are good because that lets you chip away at the truth, right? So a lot of times we're looking for the truth, whether it's the statements that we're making or we're looking to understand something, we're looking for the truth. And, you don't always arrive at the truth right away. You have to chip away at it. And how do you chip away at it? You figure out what is it that you know already. You guess, you take shots at, okay, well, it might be this, it might be that, it might be that. And you proceed that way, right? And that's what, guessing and dialogue building works. Right, okay, so what do you think is Mikhail Bakhtin's point? Again, you don't have to be aware of Mikhail Bakhtin. The fact that he's talking about writing is a dialogue, right? What are the possible ways in which you're in conversation when you're writing? Who are you in conversation with? Okay, most of you, you're columnists, right? You're writing, you're probably, by yourself when you're writing, or maybe you're in a group setting. I don't know. Maybe you're writing, in a conference room or with other writers there. Who are you in conversation with? How do you think that word relates to you and what you do as a writer? Yeah, please feel free to speak up, because none of us know each other. None of us we're not in the same room. So I might not be able to figure out who it is. Please go ahead and say your first name, and yeah, please.
Yeah. Hello, Professor. My name is Ashika.
Hello?
And when I think of writing as a conversation, I think of conveying something to those who probably don't know much about the subject. That's how I think about it when I'm writing. So I try to make it as simple as possible, like you're explaining something to someone.
Okay. So you're saying that as a conversation, you're thinking that it is a conversation that you're having with your potential audience, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Your targeted audience or the kind of people or folks who might be interested already in what you're going to say. And they're there because they have that interest. They're there because they're they're wanting to get something out of it, right? So you're really, having a conversation with them. Fantastic. So readers, potential audience, interested folks, right? So you're in conversation certainly with them. Great response. More. Writing is a conversation. Why is writing a conversation? Who are you in conversation with when you're writing?
Hi, my name is Ashita. Am I audible?
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Just like the previous answer, I think we are in conversations with the reader because we're kind of conveying them about whatever we are writing.
Okay. So you're saying something similar to what Ashita was saying, right? So, and I didn't get your first name. Could you say your first name?
Ishita.
Ishita. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, forgive me, guys. I mean, if I'm getting your names wrong, please forgive me. Ashita and Ishita, right? No.
Yes.
Kind of. Okay. All right. Oh, thanks for confirming that. Yeah. So you're kind of saying, yeah, it's a conversation with your audience. It's a conversation with the readership, right? Fantastic. I think we have another Arjun Verma. Did you raise your hand?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes. I think when I'm writing, it's basically I'm trying to create an argument around the topic. As columnists, we deal with topics on social issues or things that are mostly in abstract in the real world and that are happening at a very on a national level, or let's say that's at a level where it's influencing and affecting a group of people. So if I try to engage in a conversation with, let's say, my targeted audience, I feel it might hamper in what in the kind of message that I'm trying to put forward, which is in which I'm trying to be highly informative and also trying to build an argument around the topic rather than just a conversation. I think conversation simples it up, but argument creates a formal arc around the topic.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, our argument is certainly there. I mean, by conversation, of course, Bakhtin does not mean that it's a casual conversation in the sense that it's all over the place. It's certainly, there is a focus to it. But yeah, you're certainly trying to build an argument. You are, building an argument with whatever it is that you're doing. As a writer, as a speaker, you have a point. Okay, yeah, sure. But we're still looking at having a conversation or interaction with your audience, right? So that's pretty much similar to what the others are saying, Arjun, right? Did I hear you right? So you're having a conversation or building an argument about a topic with, in essence, a readership, with, in essence, an audience, right? Who's going to be perhaps interested in what you're going to say. Is that correct?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, all right. So other ideas? These are fantastic, opinions so far. We want to build further on this. What do you think? Why do you think Mikhail Bakhtin is saying writing is a dialogue? Writing is a conversation. Who are you in conversation with when you're writing?
Hi, I'm Rajat here.
Yeah.
When I write, I think of it more of a conversation with myself than an audience.
Okay.
Because for me, when I sit down to write, it makes more sense to just jot down my thoughts to convince myself first than others. Because I haven't written for a wider audience that much But yeah, back in the mind, when you're writing for a particular platform, the viewership and the readership is there. But for me, what makes it more comprehending for myself is the fact that I write for myself and to woo my to weave my thoughts in a particular way for myself. Yeah, that's what I'd like to do.
Okay, fantastic. And more responses? That was Ashish, right? Was that Ashish?
No, that
Or
was
no?
Rajat.
Oh, the Rajat, and I think Ashish has his hand up. Please go
Hello.
ahead. Yeah, please go
Yes.
ahead.
Hi everyone. I'm Ashish, and I'm from Kolkata. And I would say that when we write about something, so we are putting our own thought process in a physical format. It can be on a screen or it can be on a paper. Now, when we are doing it, in some sense, like when we are writing for a platform, a public platform, we want to affect a certain change in the thought process of society towards a goal, and the goal is what we are writing about. So in this sense, it is a form of social conversation because we want to take the society in a certain direction, no matter the magnitude of the effect that we can create. So in
Okay.
that is the sense.
Okay, all right, yeah. So what do you mean, in other words, is that you have a conversation with the society, right? So, similar to what a couple of you have been saying, right? Whether it's the argument that you were talking about, right? You want to influence, folks to think a certain way, right? So you're certainly having a conversation with your audience, potential audience, but something that's bigger than that, right? So if, for example, you're trying to kind of instill a social change of some kind, right? So you're certainly having a conversation with the society at large, right? Even though they might, at least at the first go, they might or might not read your piece, but if it is convincing, if it is successful, it's going to be passed around, right? So your first audience member or group of audience, I mean, what I'm saying is that the initial audience might be X, right? They might say, oh, look at this fantastic article. It's really talking about this issue in a very new way, that is super engaging and convincing. They will pass it around. And that's how, a lot of famous pieces got not just viral, viral is the term that we're using today, but, back in the day, I don't know if you've heard of a writer called Rachel Carson. She was a female scientist. And, back in the 60s, she published various pieces in the New Yorker titled The Silent Spring. And it was super controversial when it first appeared, basically argued against using pesticides and chemicals, because that was a time when people figured out that they can kill insects easily by using DDT and other substances. And they started going crazy. They started spraying everything with insecticides and pesticides. But along with the insects, a lot of the environment was getting destroyed. Water was getting polluted. Eagles were dying. The American eagle, right? They were on the verge of extinction because of that. Anyway, so we're not going to go into that too much, but but that piece, which was popular but also controversial, right, achieved a wider readership. It became a conversation piece for the entire society. It's one of those rare instances in which a writer publishing in a magazine was able to get Congress, the US Congress, to change policy. So after a few years, it became so influential that lawmakers completely revamped their policy on pesticides and DDT and other things, right? The government, simply backed away from implementing those policies. They rewrote their law books and everything just because of what Rachel Carson started as a writer, right? Anyway, so these are great points. Arjun Varma, please go ahead. And if I'm missing anybody else, please speak up. Yeah.
Sorry, Professor, I didn't put my hand down after my turn.
Oh, okay. Was there someone else who raised their hand while I was talking about Rachel Carson? Nobody else? Okay, so yeah, one of you, I think if I remember right, I think it was Rajat who was talking about it's a conversation with the self, right? What I'll say to you guys is that, this is one of the nice things about conversations, right? And guesses and other things. I mean, a lot of times we think that, oh, we don't know that much, or we haven't heard of Mikhail Bakhtin, or we're not familiar with that work or whatever else. It's completely pointless. It doesn't matter. We already know a lot of things. Okay, and with conversation, what we do is we figure out what we know and we put everything together and we arrive at the truth. And in these last 5 or 10 minutes, what has happened, I mean, it might not be mind-blowing to you or anything like that, but basically what has happened with all your responses, every one of you is right. Okay, all of those responses together forms the truth of what Bakhtin was talking about. When you're writing, it's a conversation with yourself, it's a conversation with the society, it's a conversation with your readership, it's a conversation with the issues that you're talking about, right? There's one other aspect, which is more on a surface level that nobody quite articulated yet, but I would like to mention that, it's pretty big in terms of what, the theorists about writing, all of that stuff are saying, but it's very simple. I'm going to let you guess at that. And again, don't feel, kind of put on the spot in terms of coming up with the right answer or not. Don't worry about right answers, right? If you just focus on what you know and what you think, right, you will be on the right track. So this is more surface level. What else do you think when you're writing, are you in conversation with? Again, this is more straightforward. It's on the surface. What are some possibilities? Ideas? Ashish.
Conversation with ourselves and our thoughts, and we are trying to consolidate them.
Sure. Thoughts, your conversation with yourself and your thoughts. Yeah, sure. But let's move beyond that and come to the more straightforward, just on the surface. Just guesses. If you're looking at a piece of writing that you're producing, you're actually having a conversation within the piece of writing. You're having a dialogue with something that is very visible. Ashika.
Professor, is it possible that it's the opposition, like something that goes against your values? You're having a conversation.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, so you both of you guys are right. It's certainly a conversation with your thoughts. It's a conversation with maybe an opposition, right? That is also part of the bigger conversation. I totally grant you that. But what are some more simple or straightforward thing? And here's the thing I'll quickly say. The most straightforward things in life are sometimes the hardest for us to articulate. This is something very common to us as human beings. We think of much more complex or involved or complicated things because we're trained to value smartness on a certain level and intelligence on a certain level, and we're trying to sort of think deep, right? But I'm asking you a more fundamental level, right? So where, like, just on the surface, what are you having a conversation with? Ishita, guesses?
In a way, we're having conversation with the topic and basically what we are writing.
Okay,
Like,
topic and what you're... Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just giving an example. It wasn't that important.
Yeah, please go ahead, Ishita. You're having a conversation with your topic. You're having a conversation with what you're writing. Please proceed further. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, like if I'm writing an article on, say, feminism, and going into the whole concept of marital rape, probably, and I'm kind of like researching about the topic and I'm thinking about it. So I mean, in a way, it is related to your thoughts, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's related to thoughts. It is related to your conversation with what you're writing. Okay, that's we're getting closer. We're not quite articulating it yet, but we're getting there. Arjun, you want to try?
I think, Professor, a conversation sort of starts at a point where the two, I wouldn't address them as people, but at least in the conversation, the two ideologies, when two ideologies are, or two perspectives are in conversation, they're in conversation about vulnerabilities, their respective vulnerabilities. That is probably the primary source of a deep conversation
Okay,
about a particular topic.
All right, deep conversation. Okay, well, let's zoom out a little bit. All of you are right in terms of the meaning of the conversation here. You're having a conversation with the topic, you're having a conversation with thoughts, with your thoughts about it, maybe with the opposing side, maybe with the vulnerabilities that you're talking about, right? So all those possible layers are all there. The layers are deep and more, right? But on the surface, you're actually having a conversation with your sentences. Do you ever think of that? You're having a conversation with your paragraphs. Okay, first paragraph, you wrote something. The second paragraph is in conversation with that first paragraph. You built a sentence. That sentence needs to be in conversation with what came before it. It needs to be in conversation with what is going to come afterwards. It's this glorious and wonderful interweaving that you do, again, on a very surface level, right? You have to talk not only with yourself and with your society, with your audience, but you have to kind of talk with what you're writing already. Okay, that's what makes a piece strong. And we're going to talk more about accessibility and all these other things, right? So a surefire way to lose your audience, a surefire way to lose your readership is if you're just going on and on about something and you're kind of, you're not only not getting anywhere, but you are sort of not involving the interdependence, or rather the interactivity of it needs to come into your own writing. Okay, so one of the things that I'll simply mention to you, and there's just various ways in which you're thinking of a conversation as casual talk or whatever. I don't know what connotations you're bringing to that word, but conversation is a very, very positive thing. When you're speaking, you want to make it conversational. When you're writing, you definitely want it to be conversational, right? Especially if you're writing a piece that is meant to reach people, a more popular audience, whether it's a magazine or a newspaper article. I can understand if you're writing a scientific treatise or whatever. Even those actually well-written ones are always conversational. You can look at good examples of writing, regardless of the formality level, they're conversational. It feels like you're talking to the person. It feels like that person is actually involving you, right? And that has nothing to do with level of formality, as I was saying earlier. You could be super formal, but you could still be conversational. But when you're paying attention to the way you're building these sentences, right? That gets at the heart of making your piece not only more convincing, but also more approachable. And we'll talk about more of these things in just a minute, right? But I wanted to begin here to kind of underline the fact that even this conversation that we're having, it's very, very important for you to be involved, right? And I'm going to, prompt at various steps, because what's really useful is that, again, I come back to this notion of knowledge not being this thing that's there in a lockbox somewhere that has to be accessed. No, we all know things, right? We all have various perspectives, and we've gained those perspectives and knowledge through various ways, right? No one person is going to be able to contain or rather encapsulate all of those. So we all together make knowledge, right? So in that principle, I'm going to elicit responses from you. Let's proceed further. I'm looking at, I can't see a clock here, but let's proceed further. I can't move the slide forward for some reason. Okay, well, what about now? Are you able to see? Oh, okay, there it is. So do you see this slide? Accessibility,
Yes, Professor.
Okay, Ashish or
That was a
Ashish?
thumbs up.
Oh, yeah. So you've raised your thumb. You are able to see accessibility.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. And someone else said yes. All right, so that's good. So let's let's talk about accessibility, right? The reason why I'm beginning backwards here in terms of our title is, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, so if you have those, the later things, accessibility and coherence, that's part of going towards persuasiveness, right? So it's not like you're going to be persuasive first, and then you think of accessibility or coherence. You have to be accessible first. It doesn't matter how good your ideas are, and how well articulated your ideas are. If you're not going to be reaching your readership. Okay, so accessibility is one of the first things that you want to think about. For this, I'm going to ask you, what are some strategies that you use when you're doing an introduction? What is the point of an introduction? What are some strategies that you guys are adopting? Yeah, Ashika.
Yeah, I usually tend to start the piece with something eye-catching, something relevant, like a recent news article title.
Okay, news article. Yeah, title, something relevant, absolutely eye-catching, right? Yeah, definitely. Great. What are some other strategies? Strategies for introduction. Ashish.
I tend to use something which can induce fear in the reader so that it
Okay, all right. Yeah, it makes them sit up and take notice. Absolutely. Yeah, something really prods them to get up and pay attention. Fantastic. More ideas. These are all very good. More specific ideas, Ishita.
I like to sort of lay out a roadmap for the readers about what the
We can't hear you very well, Ishita. Could you try again? We can't hear you very well.
writing piece is going to include.
We can't hear you very well. I can't hear you very well. Could you restate that? Okay, looks like we lost Ishita.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's a little better. Please go ahead. Yeah, we're still waiting for Ishita to speak up.
Yeah, I was saying that I tend to kind of can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that I tend to kind of lay out a roadmap.
Okay, the only thing I heard is some kind of a map, right? In terms of what you're going to say, you want to map it out, you're kind of give them an indication.
So that they kind of
okay,
get aware of what all the writing.
Okay, you're breaking up a lot, Ishita. We'll actually, stop this here. I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything that you're saying. You're breaking up. So what I'm hearing from you, at least the little bits that I picked up, Ishita, was that you're saying maybe that you're mapping things out. What you're going to say later, you're giving a map or you're giving an indication of the framework. Forgive me if I didn't get that right. But all these are good strategies, right? So what are any other specific strategies that you guys use when you're writing your introduction? Anything particular that you think of, guys?
Professor, my process that I sort of work backwards. So the introduction is something that I look at the end, because as usual, like it's a general thing that introduction is supposed to intrigue the audience. For me, if I go through a process in which when I work backwards, I let the topic first intrigue me, then I get into a position where I write the introduction, which would in turn intrigue the audience.
Absolutely, something that intrigues them, right? So certainly the introduction and actually the conclusion also are both of the things that writers typically work at the end. So after they're done working on the body, that's when you compose the introduction. But I'm just wondering, anything specific that you guys can think of that you would do in the introduction stage? I mean, one of you mentioned looking for like eye-catching headlines, or whether it's a news story or whatever else. Any popular, sort of very familiar kind of strategies that you can think of for the introduction? Yeah, I'm making folks think. All right, so Ashish, yeah.
We can start with asking questions and then going on
Okay.
to answer them.
Okay, fantastic. Questions. Great, great. All right. So as I said earlier, it's going to take us a little longer to think of more straightforward kind of ways. Questions is a great strategy. Okay, questions is one possibility, and I'm sure that you use these a lot. It's just that I'm sort of prodding you to articulate some of these things that you do as an introduction. It relates very much to accessibility. So when you're asking questions, when you're looking for provocative or something that is intriguing for the readers, those are all good strategies for you, right? What are some other things that you do in the introduction that you've heard a lot about? You were told a lot, oh, you should do this, your introduction should do this, or these are some ways to build an introduction. Or maybe these things you've used in columns that you've written before. Questions is one.
Professor, quotes.
Okay, quotes, absolutely. Who said that?
Ashita.
Ashita, okay, yeah, quotes, questions, all right, or an anecdote, right? Anecdote or something that is one of you was talking about, like a news story or something that is relevant, right? And a lot of times that introduction strategies that you have there relates to the point of accessibility. You want to draw the reader in, right? You don't want to push them away. You want to bring them in, not only by involving them in something that they might be interested in, but also kind of looking for some kind of a common ground between where they are currently, right, and where you want to take them. And sometimes that might involve, a quotation. It might involve a question that you're asking. It might involve a recent news item, right, that was already part in having the conversation is already happening. For example, if you think of the Me Too movement from a couple of years ago, right, that was something that people were talking about a lot. Right. So if you have a piece that is related to that, it might be very relevant for you to tap into that and either include a quotation or a specific reference to that. That is a good strategy. Right. And we'll talk about rhetorical strategies a little bit more later. Rhetorical strategies are simply, I'm not sure if you've heard of that, if you've worked a lot with that. Those are super key for writing, guys. And don't be sort of intimidated by the term. Rhetorical strategies are simply ways in which you are presenting information, the ways in which you're communicating to be convincing someone. All of that is part of rhetoric, right? It's not just about what you're saying, but how you're saying it. That is fundamentally what is rhetoric, right? Everything that you do is there's rhetorical strategies involved with pretty much everything that you do, apart from, even if you're taking sort of casual examples from everyday life, there are also rhetorical strategies involved. Think about the time when, for example, we're currently in the COVID climate, nobody's having night outs and things like that. But let's say you attended a party, right? And you were, you were staying up late, really past your usual bedtime or whatever, right? And you sneak in through the window or whatever else. The next morning you have to tell your parents or whoever, your guardians, about that. So the strategies that you adopt there, right, to convince them that you were actually there, during that time, during midnight or 1 a.m. or whatever, you were actually there. Those are all strategies. I mean, if you're, putting a fake pillow there and, having, I was already always there. And, I had dinner right here and these are my plates. All those are also rhetorical strategies. And you might think, those are, there's just ways in which you're lying, but think about it and think about all the times that politicians are lying, right? Those are also rhetorical strategies in an extreme example, right? And that is not to say that you're lying when you're writing in a certain way, no. But what you are doing is you're controlling the way you're presenting information. Those are rhetorical strategies. So in your piece, if you're kind of holding on to the introduction for a little bit until afterwards, after you worked on the piece, you have the material, you're figuring out what is the best strategy to bring the readers in. And you certainly want to think about that. This is not just something randomly that you're doing. You want to be very mindful of those strategies, as much as politicians are mindful about what they wear. Speaking of which, do folks remember what do politicians wear mostly? I mean, at least we're talking about what is how would you describe a politician's costume? We're not even talking about anybody's content of speech or whatever. So we're not talking about the content of the messages. What are some things that you notice about a politician's attire? Or the minute that you think of a politician's attire, what are they wearing?
I think across countries, it's usually a costume that is that really represents formality or like something formal in their country. For example,
something
India,
formal in their country. Yeah. So let's keep this confined to the subcontinent, let's say, or South Asia, right? So here, let's say in the Indian subcontinent, right? So if it's just India, what are some things that quickly pop into the mind? Again, don't worry too much about I have to think carefully, be very careful about how I'm responding to this. But just talk about what are some of the things that come right into your head when you're thinking of a politician's costume. What are they wearing?
White.
White.
It's
Okay.
white all over.
White. All white. All right. So what are some connotations to someone wearing all white? Why are they wearing all white? What does white symbolize?
in the
Ashish? Yeah, I don't know who's speaking. Please go ahead.
Yes, this is Arjun. I think in the Indian context, white, of course, the entire symbolism of peace, and second is it's khadi white. So it's a direct, it's directly linking themselves to the idea of, let's say, Gandhi or someone. Entire idea of Gandhism, basically.
Okay, Gandhism or purity or peace,
yes.
Right? So okay. So my other question to you is: Are politicians pure? Are politicians peaceful? And we're speaking in general. We're not taking anybody's names. I'm just asking you.
I would say, even if they're not pure, I think it takes nothing to appropriate the dividends of somebody else who was in touch with the masses. For example, Gandhi.
Okay. All right. Okay. So maybe if they're not pure, I mean, so nobody's quite articulating this, so I will. All right, guys. All those are rhetorical strategies. So before they've spoken, before they've uttered a word, if they're getting up, their costume is a rhetorical strategy. The all white that they're wearing is a rhetorical strategy. Their accessories are rhetorical strategies, right? The vocabulary that they use, the style of language, right? Everything, or even the choice of language sometimes, the tone, and whether they're using Sanskrit expressions or they're using some other expressions, or whether they're using Oxford accented English, right? So, all those are rhetorical strategies because they're appealing to certain constituents, or they're appealing to certain, parts of the populace, right? And it goes with their message. And similarly, not to, take you to the level of the politician, but it's useful to know all those are smart people, right? Again, we don't know their level of academia, so it doesn't matter, whether they went to college or did not go to college, or whether they have a fake degree or whatever. None of that matters, right? All those are time-tested rhetorical strategies. As a politician, it's probably safe to say that someone who has sort of scripted or constructed a certain image, they're not going to be seen in public either wearing something else or doing something else, right? So at least they will resist that, because those things carry meaning and carry message, right? So before they've even said anything, as I said, their costume is a rhetorical strategy. In a similar way, as writers, you want to think about the kind of rhetorical strategies that you're going to adopt within your own piece as in column, right? And those rhetorical strategies, as I said, if you want to be more approachable, if you want to make sure that you're not alienating your audience, the introduction is one of the first places where you need to be absolutely on the mark there. Because if the reader or audience member doesn't even get through your introduction, they're not going to finish your piece. However well researched and articulated the rest of the piece is, if you lose them in the introduction, you've lost them forever, right? So the introduction is important. And again, I would not say that that's the first thing that you think about, right? You do think about your argument. We'll come to that in a minute. We'll talk about that a little bit, but the introduction and the conclusion, you are more conscious about that. You have to give due importance to that when you're formulating a column which is going to be persuasive, coherent, and accessible. All right. So, we'll talk a lot more about rhetorical strategies. There's certain ways in which, as writers, rhetorical strategies are important. I'll mention one last thing related to rhetorical strategies before I work us over to the next slide. Charles Siebert has an article in the New York Times. I didn't want to spend too much time on actually reading things together, although it would be helpful. It's about elephants, who he notes in his piece in the New York Times. It's called, Are We Driving Elephants Crazy? And in that, the whole piece is about the increasing incidence of elephants getting violent. They're attacking villages. They are, really going away from the forest homes and encroach, or rather, kind of getting into villages and killing people. And this is not something isolated to one geographic area. He says that it's been happening for the past 20 years all over the world. And the fundamental premise of his article is he is asking what is responsible for that, or who is responsible for that? Have elephants gone crazy, or is there something bigger in play? And for that article, he begins with a story setting in which he takes us on a safari in Queen Elizabeth National Park. So he's not going to see, he doesn't spend any time with statistics and all these other things. Oh, these are the experts that I talked to, all that stuff. It's important, but he's not going to bore us to death by getting into that in the beginning. So the first several paragraphs are this very, very scenic, beautiful, beautiful written piece where it's like almost like we're reading a novel. We're looking at, we're in safari with Charles Siebert. We're in the Jeep with him. We're smelling the grass. We're looking at the elephants. It's just wonderful, right? But that is a rhetorical strategy. I mean, that's not to say that 90% of his article is full of data and interviews with researchers and everything. All that comes later. But when you read the initial piece, we are with him, right? And that is a rhetorical strategy. It's not like he did not save that to the end. He did not put that beautiful story-like thing at the end. He put it at the beginning. That's a rhetorical strategy as a writer. We'll talk a lot more about that. Let's go to the next one. Can you guys see this one? Coherence? Okay, all right. So, all right. So what's your thesis? That's the first thing that you want to think about when you want to be coherent. And we'll talk about what is the meaning of a thesis in just a minute. And every communication has to have a thesis. Every communication. Doesn't matter if we're talking about more like everyday situations, if you're talking with your family or with your grandparents, let's say you haven't talked with your grandparent for 3 years. If you're giving him or her a phone call, you have to have a thesis. You have to have a focus there. As I said, believe it or not, even Donald Trump has a thesis when he's whenever he speaks. So how do we define this word that we hear all the time? Okay, let's have some definitions of it. I mean, again, don't worry about whether you're getting the definition right or not, but I'm just curious to think, what are some guesses that you will have? What does the word thesis mean? It could be something that it means to you. It could be, how you understood it before, Anshika. Or Ashika, yeah, please.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's okay, Professor. It's an argument, I think you put forward, like something you have to, I think like prove, or something you build towards by the end of your piece.
Yeah, sure. You build towards by the end of the piece, but okay, it's something that you have to prove. Yeah, all right. Okay. Yeah, good guess. More guesses.
I think it is the primary idea of the conversation that we are going to have.
Okay, so the idea or something in a nutshell, the conversation that you're going to have, and the rest of the piece you're going to follow a certain thing, and that is going to be in a nutshell. Okay, that's a good way to put it. Other ideas? What is your understanding of the word thesis? Again, this is not just restricted to formal writing or anything like that. As I said, every piece of communication has to have a thesis. Think of the worst politician that you can think of. If they're getting up to speak, they have a thesis. And what is that word? What does it mean? Okay, well, what is the other, what are some other words that you might be familiar with that incorporate the word thesis in it? It starts with an H.
An hypothesis.
Hypothesis. All right, great. All right. So, okay, we're moving along here. Hypothesis. Okay, so let me ask you, what is the meaning of a hypothesis? Again, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, and a hypothesis is something that can be proved or disproved.
Something that can be proved or disproved. Okay, so what else would you say about a hypothesis?
I think the way it's different from a thesis is that a thesis is just a statement, and the hypothesis might be something that's supplementing the thesis statement.
Well, okay, so yeah, okay, you probably mean when you say that the thesis statement is something a little broader in the sense that you're incorporating shades to it, right? So shades of gray, possible ways in which you're not simply going to one side or the other. You might be in the middle. So in that way, it is your point is relevant. But yeah, so what are some contexts in which you hear the word hypothesis? Who uses that word? Or where have you heard that word a lot? We have a couple of hands up. I'm not sure if I'm hearing you right there.
I think scientists would use it.
Okay, scientists. Okay, scientists would use the word hypothesis. And again, the point here for me is let us not get hung up with the sometimes, as I said earlier, intimidatory nature of certain words, right? And certain words have entered our heads by repetition that we've lost all kinds of real meaning behind it. Because the word thesis already has certain connotations with you. And again, it's not that big of a deal, right? So it's used in the it's very important, but it's not that huge word. It actually means something more straightforward. But okay, so hypothesis, scientists use that, right? So scientists use that word to either prove or disprove later. Right? What are the means by which scientists prove or disprove a hypothesis?
So I think it hinges on data a lot, either quantitative or qualitative, and then
Okay.
methods you can employ to do that.
Okay, you employ methods or various data that you're able to gather together. Okay, what are the ways that you get that data as a scientist? Again, we're not scientists. This is not a scientific session in any way. But what are some ways? I mean, again, I'm calling back our pre-existing knowledge having to do with a word which is very similar to hypothesis, or rather very similar to the word thesis, simply because it incorporates the word thesis in it. Hypothesis. Okay, what are some means by which these scientists, get their hands on these data?
Exploration.
Okay, exploration. All right. Okay. All right. So other guesses? Shreya?
Past research, if anyone's done a similar study, they take data similar to theirs.
Okay. Okay. Past data, other research, published research. Yeah, sure. More ideas. And again, I'm not sure how many of you are again, you don't have to have a scientific background. Again, none of us are discussing about science here, but I'm just curious to kind of open up that term and have you think about what are the ways in which scientists proceed further when they have a hypothesis? How do they gather that data? More ideas.
So I think Sushmita this side. So I feel it's either through experimentation or observation. If you look
at experiments, absolutely, bingo, right? So you have past research, but you also have experiments. You have observational data. So everything that scientists do there, right, has to do with either proving or disproving a hypothesis. The whole point of it is the hypothesis is something that you're coming up with. Either you have a brainwave, you think, oh, this is how the truth should be, and you're you're coming up with a hypothesis. A lot of times scientists don't have a proof for that before they come up with the hypothesis. They have a hunch, and they think, okay, this is how things might be, and they come up with that hypothesis, and they later prove it. Right? Or they disprove it. And the whole thing is about that idea that you're having, right? And the hypothesis actually is very much related to the thesis. In the genesis of that word, where does this word come from? I mean, back in Greek Roman times when folks were sitting around together and discussing things and arguing things, if you think of like Senate, all these sort of forums in which they were communicating. A thesis is simply a point, that you're placing in front of a group. So to put or place, that's what it means. That's all it means. You can think of, I just have this wireless mouse here that I'll show to you. So if I say that this is my thesis, and you put in front of everybody on the conference table, you put it there, that's your point, right? When you're having a meeting with 12 other or 15 other intelligent sort of senators, thinkers, right? Each of you has a point and you put it in front of the group. And what you do in the rest of your time is you prove that point. You convince the others that what you're saying is correct, right? The way you do that is by repeated corroboration of that point through examples, through data, through evidence, through argument, right? Through argument as in, and convincing ways in which you're coming back again and again to that particular point. These are all the various ways in which this thing is true. You should think about it in this way because, right? And you develop that whole piece that you're putting forward, whether it's a speech that you're giving verbally or if it's something that you're writing, you're coming back, reinforcing that again and again, right? So that's what we mean by the word thesis. And if you are attending to that fundamentally, you're automatically going to be coherent in whatever that you write. You're not going to be all over the place. You're not going to be losing your audience because you're going to stick to your point. Everything that you're writing is going to be related to that point. You have to have a point. That's what I was saying. That's all it means when I say every communication has to have a thesis. It has to have a point, right? When Donald Trump gets up to speak, he has a point. He wants you to vote for him, right? Or rather, he did, back in the day when he was making campaign speeches, conceded or whatever. So, there's a point to everything that he's doing. And in particular times, whether it's election campaigning or whatever else, a politician might have slightly different points that they're making, right? If a politician is giving a speech 1 month from election day, that point might be slightly different. If they're announcing some kind of a scheme based on which they want you to vote for him or her, right? The point has to, relates to that particular scheme, explaining that scheme, how that is going to benefit them. That's their thesis, right? So all you have to think about when you're putting things together, you want to be clear on the point that you're making. And it does not have to be huge. It does not have to be groundbreaking in any way necessarily, but it has to be interesting, right? What is your point fundamentally when you put everything in a nutshell? What are you saying? Are you saying that air pollution in Delhi, for example, is caused not so much by vehicular pollutions, but rather because of fossil fuel emissions in power plants, because a lot of these power plants use fossil fuels, right? If that is your thesis, if that's your point, the rest of your piece, your column or whatever else is going to, gather data or show data that proves that, right? And you're going to be coherent because you're going to stick to that point. Okay, so that's the first thing that you want to be thinking about. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's come back and we'll proceed further. Okay, let's actually, we'll be right back. I'm going to let folks breathe a little bit. Okay, let's pause for 5 minutes. We'll be right back. Hello, folks. I'm back. Tanya, if you can hear me or if you're here, I'm back
Yes,
as well.
I'm here.
Fantastic. So we
Can hear
can
you.
begin at 12:05. You know, just quickly, I'll mention in terms of I might not have, I did not have access to the time actually. I'm actually able to track now. I want to make sure that we're not going to go over at all. So we'll. It's 12:05 currently, I think. So that's, you know, I mean, I will keep a watch on that, but just let me know in terms of if we're you know, getting close to the 12:30 time. Let me know, okay, Tanya?
I will, sure.
Just in case, okay, yeah, but we'll do it. You know, we'll pay attention to that. I mean, all right, folks, is everybody back, you think?
I'm sure they are, Professor. I think you can carry on.
Some of folks are there. Okay, that's you, Tanya.
Yes, that was me. I think most people are back.
Most people are back. Okay, Ashish is here. All right, so fantastic. All right, so you know, we're talking about you know, a few things here in terms of thesis. We have had a really good discussion. Great job so far, everybody, with your guesses. You know, and all those ways in which we're able to take the conversation forward. One thing that I'll quickly mention to everybody, I'm a fiction writer. Okay, I do, you know, my main focus is in kind of creative writing, but also do a lot of and teach a lot of expository writing. Why do I mention that? Because, you know, at least here in India, it seems to me that there is not as much of a focus on these two types of writing, or rather a kind of encompassing understanding about those two terms. Basically, there's only two types of writing, guys. There's creative writing, novels, poems, stories, and there's critical writing. That's it, right? A very, very small part of that, of critical writing, is actually academic writing. Very few people do it. 99% of the writing that happens in the world is non-academic. Just because something is non-academic does not make it unimportant. Okay, but it is still critical writing or expository writing. And by expository writing, we mean that it has an argument, it is discussing things, it's explaining things. So it's a type of writing that is found in magazine articles, in newspaper articles, you know, opinion pieces, editorials, right? As well as in scientific journals and all these other things, but they also have to have an argument. It's certainly only in the kind of formality levels that some of these pieces, these narrow pieces, have to you know, delve into, right? But don't worry so much about those levels of formalities. If you're attending to argument, if you're attending to your pieces having a thesis, right? And they being coherent, you're on the right track with any kind of expository writing that you do. And believe me, every type of writing, at least my understanding that you're all columnists, that you're doing is expository, right? It is explaining things, it is you know, elaborating on certain points, it's making an argument, it's proving that argument, right? All of that is under expository writing. As I said, although my focus is as a fiction writer, is on certain aspects of creative writing, but I also teach a lot of expository writing. But there's ways in which it's important for us to remember that, you know, while all writing, you know, has to be built on dialogue, and certainly expository writing also does, you know, there are certain things that you have to be paying attention to, right? To achieve coherence, to achieve persuasion, right? And let's move forward with the next slide. I think if I clicked on this. There we go. Just looking for the next slide here. Okay, is that there? Okay, there it is. Can you guys see that slide called transitions? Okay, Ashish says yes. Why transitions? right? What are some examples of transitions in everyday life that you see in other spheres that you see? Where do you use transitions?
Presentations,
I'm sorry?
PowerPoint presentations.
Okay, yeah, PowerPoint presentations, okay, yeah. You know, yeah, kind of, yeah, because you're probably, you know, going to the next slide. Okay, that's a transition. You're moving to the next slide. Yeah, more examples from everyday life?
Professor, if I may,
Yeah.
I think like this could be on a philosophical level, but it could be anything ranging from the transition of the day. When the day transitions into night, it does not suddenly turn from broad daylight
Okay.
into broad night. So
Okay.
there's a transition to that, and in similar way, transition through life is as well,
Absolutely, that's a
like in career
great,
terms as well.
absolutely, that's a fantastic point. That's an absolutely great way to kind of encapsulate transitions. Thanks for that. What's your first name?
Sir, my name is Amandeep.
Aman? Okay, yeah, we're Amandeep, we're probably not going to meet each other again. So, you know, it probably doesn't matter here. But I'm just curious in terms of, so that everybody else can hear the name as well. That's a great point. You know, in terms of transitions, you're looking for that buffer space between two things, right? So it's not only fundamental to human beings. So, you know, it's certainly, I think it's valid for us to say it's fundamental to all life. It's fundamental to the universe. It's fundamental to everything that we see around us, right? But that's something that's really important for us to remember, that everything that you're writing has those transitions built in. But we're still looking for some examples of transitions in everyday life. You know, remember how we talked about like the most straightforward things sometimes take us time to articulate. What are some transitions that you can think of in other spheres or fields of life other than writing or PowerPoint presentations or Pankaj Challa with his presentation, whatever? You know, what are some examples of transitions that you can think of?
I think just conversations in the everyday.
Okay.
So I think of transition as something that connects. So you can transition from an idea to the other. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying it's a verbal transition, right? So you're moving from one topic to the other, even if you're conversing with a friend, right? So you're sort of using verbal transitions. Okay, that's good. Okay. In other spheres of life, I mean, you know, what are some other examples that you can think of? Anything specific that comes to mind? Maybe if you're driving a car, you know, what is a possible transition for you that is relevant, maybe if you're driving a car?
If I may, I
Yeah.
think of transition as one could be a physical transition where the person is actually moving from one space to another. And one way to look at it would be a mental transition, where the transition is not physical, but your ideas and whatever you think of is actually moving.
Absolutely, absolutely. Bingo, right? So physical as well as mental transitions. Mental transitions are reflected on the level of ideas, right? Whether it's a piece that you're writing, right? So you're moving, you know, verbally, you're orienting the reader towards that other point, right? But something really important for us to remember is the more physical, and again, just because something is physical does not devalue it, right? It's super useful. So, you know, if any of you are fans of, you know, stand-up comedy, for example, right? What do stand-up comics do when they're transitioning from one kind of focus in their piece, in their set piece to the other? What are some things that they do that qualify as transitions? Okay, yeah.
They conclude the previous joke. with like 1 or 2 sentences.
Okay, to conclude the previous joke, yeah, absolutely. What are some things that you can see are actual transitions? You can see it in front of your eyes. We had one other person who raised their hand earlier. I want to make sure that we don't miss them. What are some things that they do? Mukundan.
Yeah, Professor, they sip their glass of water, they move their stool around, things like that.
Absolutely. They sit, they stand, they walk around, they pick up a glass of bottle like here. I have a bottle, I'm going to take a sip. That's a transition. Okay, and that's not unimportant. You have to have those transitions in writing. Okay, let's move to that. What are some examples of transitions in writing as well? Right, Rajat Chowdhury, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of stand-up comedy, as you said. So sometimes they do this throwback, right? And I was thinking, like, when people speak of transition, they think that it has to be from something to something new, but it's not the case always, right? You can transit back to one place, right? So it's not necessarily a move forward. Sometimes it's a move backward as well. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And that transition is also sometimes used as a way to get people to breathe out, right? If they made some really like hard-hitting points in their previous joke, what they would do is they just transition back a little bit. They just kind of let the air out a little bit, right? And get everybody kind of reset everybody. And that's useful in that way. So those transitions are important as well. I was mentioning this example of cars earlier. I mean, this might occur to you or might not occur to you, or it appears weird, right? So think about the time when you're driving a car, you're mostly driven in the US. So I'm speaking from experience there. You could stay just on that lane, right? When you're wanting to move to another lane, what is it that you do when you're driving, you think? What is the transition there?
Professor, we give an indicator.
Yeah, the turn indicator, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. The turn indicator, you just turn that thing on and you indicate to people who are behind you, who are in front of you, whatever, that you are going to move lanes. That's transition. Right, so it's there throughout our lives, guys, and it's super, super important to build these transitions into your writing. Okay, it's almost as important as you having a thesis and everything else. Your piece is not going to hold together if all these various elements are not sewn together with a certain glue, and that glue is the transitions, right? It's going to fall apart if you're just going to go, oh, this point, I'm just going to move, clunk, clunk, clunk. I'm going to move one to the other abruptly without any attention to the way people are going to receive information. You have to have transitions. Let's come to examples of transitions in writing. We're getting towards the end of our time together. So let's get some ideas on examples of transitions in writing. I mean, these could be examples that you've used so far in your columns. These are things that you do all the time in your college papers or essays or whatever. What are some things that occur to you right away? What are some examples? Yeah.
Hi, this is Sagra.
Yeah.
I'd use some transition words when moving from one point to another. So if I was speaking about a certain detriment of some policy, in the next point I would mention not only is this the case, there's also something else.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic phrase. Not only, but also, however, and all these other things, right? So Amandeep.
Yes, Professor. So to add to that, I perfectly agree to that. But I also think in terms of sentences, when we transition from one paragraph to another or from one part of the writing to another, I think short, concise sentences that quickly draw the attention of the reader to what we're moving to. But this is not all that there is to the story. And then we move on. So such sentences And also,
Absolutely.
this is a question to you.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. So in terms of transitions, incorporating transitions into writing, that sometimes makes the writing bulky. So how do we, and I agree that it is something that we have to balance, but at the same time, how do we like go about it? How do we make sure that, you know, our writing seems coherent, but at the same time, we do not end up writing 10,000 words?
Yeah. So you definitely don't want a quick response to that. You're absolutely right in terms of incorporating transitions into your sentences, right? You know, the whole key there is conciseness, right? So one paragraph, if for example, that particular paragraph, you know, where we're talking about pollution in Delhi, right, earlier, you know, that has to relate to, you know, fossil fuel use in power plants. You know, that is kind of, you know, giving data and all these other things. So the way you transition to the next point that you're making, probably something as simple as, while it has been true that power plants, you know, contributed significantly to pollution in the last few years, you know, it is also notable to know, it is not also notable for us to, you know, pay attention to the fact that vehicular emissions have also increased, something like that, right? So you're actually making a new point, while at the same time in that sentence, you're encapsulating an idea from earlier. That is not repeating yourself at all right? So long as you were doing it concisely, you're not going to affect the word count that much. So, you know, here's the thing that I'll quickly say about that. If with proper transitions or without proper transitions, if the word count of your piece is, you know, let's say 750 words, if you incorporate concise transitions, I promise you, it's not going to be more than 790 words. It's going to be as simple as that. If you're really, you know, kind of repeating yourself, you're going over and over, that's tedious. You don't want to do that, right? But that's not an issue at all. If you're doing it properly, if you're only transitioning, keeping it brief, keeping it concise and interesting, yeah, absolutely. You can totally do that. You can do both, but you need that glue. Okay, that's the point that I want to be making. Without that glue of transitions, your piece is going to fall apart. It's not going to feel cohesive. It's not going to feel as coherent as you can make it. All right, let's go to the next slide. We're how are we doing on time? We're kind of almost there. So okay, so persuasion. The prerequisite, guys, is having the previous 3 attributes as a bare minimum. That's the essence of persuasion. If you're looking at, you know, being convincing, you want to be coherent, you want to be accessible first, or rather you want to be accessible first, then coherent, you have to have a thesis and all of that stuff, right? Those 3 things are 1, 2, 3. Those are essential for you. Okay, at the essence of all of that is empathy, right? Being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, being able to, you know, imagine where the reader is coming from. You know, that tone, that attitude, you know, you have to remember that first. And that also drives all these other choices that you're making. How do you introduce? How do you conclude, right? Your rhetorical strategies that you adopt during your piece, the tone and word choice, everything is going to be, you know, influenced by your placing yourself in an empathetic position, right? So long as you do that, you're going to be on the right track. Right. So I mentioned rhetorical strategies here again, because even not just in the introduction, but in the rest of the piece as well, you have to be aware of how you're presenting information as well, not just what you're presenting, right? I mentioned the Charles Siebert article before. In the middle of the essay, he's got a lot of data and statistics, but he chooses to quote directly from experts who are elephant researchers. He doesn't say XYZ said this, right? He quotes from them directly. That is a rhetorical strategy. There are a lot of other strategies that he uses in terms of words that he chooses. He uses a lot of words which are common between humans and elephants. For example, as human beings, we love the word family and society, right? We think of those words as fundamental to us as human beings, but elephant society, right? Elephant family is not something that we hear as much about, but he uses those words everywhere. That is a rhetorical strategy. By the time you finish reading the article, you're totally with him and with his points that, he says basically that elephants have not gone crazy. We as human beings have encroached upon their space. We've poached them, we've eradicated their forest homes for cultivation, right? We're responsible for driving elephants crazy. It's us, right? He says that, they're going through a kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's why they're acting this way. That post-PTSD is caused by human behavior. That's the reason the entire piece, it doesn't begin with that idea, right? It slowly builds towards that idea. He gathers evidence and data to support that, but he's very, very conscious about the words that he uses, and he makes sure that we empathize with elephants, right? And just the choices of words and writing styles that he adopts, all of those are rhetorical strategies. Okay, the last thing that I want to say is think about your conclusion. What are some ways you think the conclusion differs from the introduction? Are both of them the same thing? Or are they different? Ideas, what's the difference of the conclusion from the introduction? Yeah, Ashish.
I think it's a touch more informed repetition of the introduction.
Okay, a little bit repetition. All right. So yeah, as we said earlier, especially for these word restricted columns that you're writing, it's probably not a great idea to repeat yourself at all. So what, but what is different about the conclusion?
Sir, if I may.
Yeah.
Sir, I think one point could be that there has to be some forceful action at the end of it. It has to be action oriented.
Okay, call to action. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, earlier, I think it was Ashish or whoever who said repetition actually didn't mean that you're repeating yourself necessarily. You probably mean that you're summarizing certain key ideas, right? So that's definitely relevant. You want to be offering kind of echo is how I would put it, and not just summary. You're echoing something, maybe not in the same language, but you're actually reinforcing an earlier idea, but in a very concise manner. I'm sure, but you're calling to action, right? What else are you doing in the conclusion that's probably different?
I think it provides an answer to your thesis.
Okay, provides an answer. Yeah, hopefully in the rest of the piece, that there's also that answer is provided, but I think you probably mean that it kind of underlines that answer, right? So you're stating something very definitely in the conclusion, right? Okay, so, this is the last thing that I'll mention here. The conclusion is something that you want to leave people with, looking at implications or broader implications, looking to the future. Okay, that's something that you want to be doing. So while in the introduction, you're drawing their attention, in the conclusion, you want to get them to think about, okay, so air pollution in New Delhi. What about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? Right? That look to the future is a gesture. You're expanding out when you're moving to the conclusion, right? You're not just talking about just that topic or issue at hand, but how is it related to everything else? What are the bigger implications of pollution in Delhi? What are the implications to North India? What are the implications to our life 5 years from now, 10 years from now? If any of you are from Bombay, You know that that there's a lot of I'm not as aware of if there's as much discussion in Bombay, but I used to live in Miami, and there's a huge discussion about climate change, making Miami, like 10 years from now or 20 years from now, go under the ocean. So those are implications for Southern Florida, right? Maybe those implications are also valid for a city like Mumbai, right, which is built on an island. And those gestures that you're doing are gestures merely. The rest of the paper, probably has to do, like we're mentioning, pollution has to do with the meat and bones of, the causes of pollution in Delhi. But that gesture towards the end is just a little bit of expanding out, right? How is this going to affect our children? How is it going to affect the next generation? Right? Just looking to the future, asking that question, call to action, making people think, leaving people with something for them to ponder about, right? And again, it's something brief that you do. The most effective conclusions that I can think of, especially those that are published in mass circulation magazines or whatever, we're just about getting to time, is that, they are pithy, right? They're to the point. They're, again, concise, but they're like absolutely just there. They just grab you, just like the introduction grabs you. The conclusion kind of, keeps hold of you. It makes you think, makes you ponder. After you close reading the piece, I mean, if you're done, reading that piece, you close your tablet or computer or whatever else, and you go for a run, and you're pondering, you're still thinking about that piece, right? That's what you want to leave people with in the conclusion. All right, so this has been a fantastic, session. It's been, for me, I mean, I don't know how it was for you, but, it's been great talking with everybody. As I said, we haven't met. We haven't sort of quite conversed in that way. We're in this weird situation with the coronavirus pandemic. I appreciate the fact that everybody's here on a Sunday morning, that you were able to devote this time and attention to kind of thinking about a few things. Hope some of this has helped. We'll hopefully, this is going to see some material, benefits to you with the pieces that you're working on later on. Okay. Thanks so much to Tanya Rana for facilitating this. She's been fantastic. And everybody who's taken part, everybody who's helped out with this, my thanks on behalf of CWS and everybody out here, on my colleagues and everything. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think this was great for all of us at Nickel and Dime Center for New Economic Studies. And we really hope that a lot of the important discussions that we've had today will be translated into some really strong pieces from our columnists. Thank you so much. Fantastic, great job. I'm gonna hit the, I can't even see the leave button wherever. So, here's the thing, I mean, so I don't know if you've noticed this, I mentioned this earlier, might have mentioned this earlier, in terms of people saying farewell and they're never gone because they're looking for the leave button. I don't want to be ending up too much in that. So I'm gonna, how do I leave the button? Where do I leave? Do I just close the window? Professor, yes, I think you can close the presentation. You can stop sharing your screen. Oh, stop sharing. Oh, let me first stop sharing, and then we're gonna get there. Oh, then I'm gonna be able to hit the leave button. All right, guys, fantastic, amazing. I'm gonna hit the leave button. I'm gonna vanish. Take care. All the best. Have a good rest of Sunday. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.